The boardroom on the 52nd floor of Ashford Industries commanded a view that most people would never see in their lifetimes. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Manhattan like a museum piece worth more than entire neighborhoods, the morning sun catching the glass towers of Midtown and scattering light across a polished mahogany table where 12 executives sat in absolute stillness. Behind the podium, a logo gleamed in silver and deep blue on the projection screen. Dubois Holloway Language Scholarship Foundation. The man standing at the front of the room wore a charcoal Brioni suit that fit like it had been crafted specifically for his shoulders. 18 months ago, those same shoulders had carried serving trays through this building's rooftop restaurant, invisible to the very people now watching him with a mixture of respect and barely concealed astonishment. His name was Damon Holloway. He was 32 years old, and the woman rising to stand beside him had once tried to destroy him with words she assumed he could not understand. Victoria Ashford moved with the precision of someone who had spent 3 decades commanding rooms full of powerful men. At 52, her platinum blonde hair and gray eyes still projected the authority that had built a $47 billion empire. But something had changed in the 18 months since that night at Lumiere. The ice in her gaze had thawed into something more complex, more human. This scholarship bears 2 names. Her voice carried across the silent room. Henri Dubois, who gave me my first opportunity when the world saw nothing in me worth saving, and Damon Holloway, who reminded me that dignity is the one thing that cannot be purchased at any price. On the screen behind them, photographs of 30 children appeared, their faces bright with possibility, each holding a certificate that would reshape their futures. 30 kids from backgrounds that should have limited them forever, now given the tools to transcend every barrier placed in their path. But the executives in this boardroom did not know the full story. They did not know about the night when 3 drops of water had become a declaration of war, or how a single act of defiance had unraveled everything Victoria Ashford believed about power and the people who served her. 18 months earlier, Damon Holloway had been a waiter at the most exclusive restaurant in Manhattan, and Victoria Ashford had been about to make the worst mistake of her life. The alarm clock read 5:45 when Damon silenced it, his hand moving through darkness with the practiced precision of 3 years of identical mornings. The Brooklyn apartment materialized around him in fragments as his eyes adjusted, the cracked ceiling first, then the water-stained walls, then the narrow window where gray November light was beginning to seep through grimy glass. He lay still for 30 seconds, listening to the radiator clank and wheeze in the corner, gathering the energy required to face another day, built entirely on survival. The mattress beneath him had developed a permanent impression of his body, a crater formed by countless nights of restless sleep and dreams that always ended the same way, with Camille's face fading into white hospital light. 3 years since the phone call from Mount Sinai. 3 years since his world had compressed into a single point of grief, so dense it had its own gravity. The car accident on Atlantic Avenue had taken everything except Nia, and some mornings Damon still woke, reaching for a warmth that would never return to the empty side of his bed. He swung his legs onto the cold floor and stood, navigating the 12 steps to the bathroom without turning on lights. The mirror above the sink showed him what it always showed: a 32-year-old man wearing the face of someone much older, dark circles carved beneath eyes that had once sparkled with the joy of discovering how languages connected human beings across every divide. His cheekbones had grown sharper over the past year, the visible evidence of meals skipped so Nia could eat, of a body slowly consuming itself to keep a child fed. The kitchen table held the same stack of envelopes that had been accumulating for weeks, each one a small catastrophe waiting to detonate. $800 for rent, now 3 weeks overdue, the late fees compounding like interest on a debt to the universe. $168 for electricity, stamped with red letters warning of imminent disconnection. $425 for Nia's school, the administrators growing less patient with each passing week. The credit card statement underneath showed $4,200 at 24% interest, a number that grew faster than any payment he could make. His checking account held $62.17. He had verified this 3 times the previous night, each check yielding the same impossible figure, the same mathematical certainty that the coming weeks would require miracles he had no reason to expect. Damon started the coffee maker with grounds he had stretched far beyond their intended use, the resulting liquid more brown water than actual coffee, and began preparing for another shift at Lumiere. The small footsteps reached him before the voice did, the particular rhythm of a 7-year-old navigating a dark apartment with the confidence of someone who knew every creaking board. "Daddy, you are still here." Nia stood in the doorway of her bedroom, clutching a piece of paper against her pajamas, her purple-framed glasses already perched on her nose despite the early hour. She had her mother's eyes, warm brown with flecks of gold that caught even the dimmest light, and the gap-toothed smile that could make Damon forget every problem crushing down on him. "I am here, baby girl. Come show me what you have." She crossed the distance between them and presented the paper with ceremonial gravity, a masterpiece unveiled for its most important critic. 2 stick figures stood beneath a yellow sun, their bodies made of simple lines but their connection unmistakable, hands joined by a wobbly bridge of crayon. Above them, in letters that tilted slightly to the right, she had written words in French. "Je t'aime, papa. I love you, daddy." Nia's face glowed with anticipation. "Did I spell everything right?" "We practiced yesterday." Damon knelt to her level, examining the letters with the exaggerated seriousness their morning French lessons had established as ritual. These 30-minute sessions before school had become his favorite part of each day, a small island of purpose in an ocean of struggle, a way to keep his mind from rusting and Camille's memory alive through the language she had always wanted their daughter to learn. Almost perfect. He pointed to a letter. The accent on the A should curve the other way. "But I can read it clearly, and I love you too. Bigger than the sky." The smile that spread across Nia's face was worth more than everything Damon had lost, a reminder that some forms of wealth could never be measured in dollars. But the smile faded quickly, replaced by something more fragile. "Daddy, why do you always leave when I am sleeping?" Her voice had grown small in a way that made his chest ache. "And you come back when I am still sleeping. I never see you anymore." The words landed with the weight of stones dropped from a great height, each one striking a different bruise on his conscience. He pulled her close, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, and wished for the 10,000th time that the world had been built differently. "I know it is hard, sweetheart, but Daddy works so we can keep our home and so you can go to school. It is how we get to have our French lessons every morning. I do not like it. I do not like it either. But sometimes we have to do hard things even when they hurt. Our dignity does not depend on how much money we have, Nia. It depends on how we treat ourselves and others." She pulled back to look at him, her expression carrying a seriousness that seemed too heavy for 7 years. "Our dignity does not depend on money. That is exactly right." He kissed her forehead and stood, his eyes drifting involuntarily to the kitchen table, where the envelopes waited like patient executioners. Tonight's shift at Lumiere was not optional. The tips from wealthy customers who barely glanced at his face represented the thin margin between survival and catastrophe. Mrs. Patterson arrived at 6 o'clock precisely, the same time she arrived every evening Damon worked. 73 years old with silver hair and hands that never stopped moving, she had lived in the adjacent apartment for 2 decades and had helped Camille bring Nia home from the hospital as a newborn. When the accident happened, she had simply appeared at Damon's door and announced that she would watch Nia whenever he needed, and the matter had not been open for discussion. $25 a night, far less than any babysitter in Brooklyn would accept, and Damon suspected even that amount was charity disguised as transaction. He had never found adequate words to thank her for keeping his family afloat when everything else was sinking. "You look exhausted, honey." Mrs. Patterson settled onto the couch with her knitting, her hearing aid emitting a soft whistle as she adjusted it. Naya had already curled up beside her, drowsy despite the early hour, more exhausted than last week. "I am fine, Mrs. Patterson. You have never been a convincing liar." She fixed him with the look that had probably maintained order in her third-grade classroom for 4 decades. That child needs her father healthy, not worked to the bone. Damon did not argue. He bent to kiss Nia one final time, watching her eyes drift closed, the drawing still clutched in her small hand. "I will be back before she wakes up. You always are. Go on now." He took one last look at his daughter, this small person who represented everything worth fighting for, and stepped into the hallway. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and he walked toward the subway that would carry him to a world where people like him existed only as functions, as hands that poured wine and carried plates and absorbed whatever treatment the wealthy chose to dispense. Lumiere occupied the entire 67th floor of a glass tower overlooking Central Park, a temple to excess where the elevator ride alone cost more than Damon earned in a month. The restaurant had been designed to make ordinary people feel insignificant, with soaring ceilings and crystal chandeliers and tables positioned to ensure that conversations about billion-dollar acquisitions remained private. Everything about the space announced that those who dined here had transcended the concerns of common humanity. Damon had learned to be invisible within these walls. He had mastered the art of existing without being perceived, of moving between tables like a shadow whose only purpose was to serve and then dissolve. The clients who frequented Lumiere rarely acknowledged the staff, preferring to see uniforms and functions rather than human beings with histories and dreams and children waiting at home. Some guests were polite in the distant way that people are polite to appliances. Most were simply indifferent, their gazes sliding past him as though he were constructed of glass. A few, however, seemed to take pleasure in cruelty, and Damon had experienced every variation of their contempt during his 3 years of employment. He had been called names that would have provoked violence in any other setting. He had watched drinks hurled at colleagues for imaginary failures. He had endured a woman snapping her fingers at him as though summoning a dog, a man loudly questioning whether the restaurant had lowered its standards, couples laughing at his pronunciation of French wines, even when that pronunciation was flawless. He had swallowed every insult and absorbed every humiliation because the job demanded it, because Nia needed new glasses, and the landlord did not accept dignity as currency. The staff room vibrated with unusual tension when Damon arrived, servers clustering in corners with voices reduced to anxious whispers, the air itself seeming to thicken with collective dread. Bernard Henderson, the floor manager, spotted him immediately and crossed the room with the desperate relief of a drowning man sighting land. Bernard was 54, balding, perpetually sweating through his shirts regardless of temperature. He had once been maitre d' at a Michelin-starred establishment in France, a man with standards and aspirations. Now he was a professional diplomat, a buffer between impossible clients and the staff who served them. "Damon, thank God you are here." His voice cracked slightly. "Major situation tonight. Victoria Ashford, private dining room, 8 o'clock. The name descended into the conversation like a stone into still water. Everyone in Manhattan's service industry knew Victoria Ashford and the reputation that preceded her like a warning siren. CEO of Ashford Industries, a technology conglomerate valued at $47 billion. Forbes list fixture, business magazine cover regular, and according to the whispered stories that circulated through restaurant kitchens across the city, a woman whose displeasure ended careers with the efficiency of a guillotine blade. 3 servers from different establishments had been terminated after working her table. Not for genuine mistakes, but because Victoria Ashford had decided they had failed in some invisible way that only she could perceive. Her influence stretched across the hospitality industry like a web, and anyone caught within it did not escape unscathed. She requested a male server specifically. Bernard's voice had tightened with barely controlled anxiety. "Something about professionalism. You are the only man working tonight, so I am serving her. You are serving her." Damon studied the manager's glistening face and asked the question that hung between them. And if something goes wrong, Bernard did not answer. The silence communicated everything. If Victoria Ashford complained, Damon's career in this city would end before sunrise. No job meant no rent meant no apartment meant consequences too terrible to contemplate. "I will handle it." The next 90 minutes dissolved into preparation, every detail of the private dining room attended to with obsessive precision. Fresh flowers arranged at mathematically exact angles, temperature calibrated to precisely 70 degrees, specific water brands positioned on the sideboard, imported varieties whose names Damon could not pronounce, but whose prices he knew from memory. Nothing could be left to chance, because with Victoria Ashford, chance was simply another word for disaster. At 7:58, Damon took his position against the wall, back straight, face carefully neutral, body language communicating only readiness to serve. He had learned to become furniture, to exist without presence, to provide function without humanity. Whatever transpired in the coming hours, he would endure it. He had to endure it. Naya was waiting for him to come home. Victoria Ashford arrived at exactly 8 o'clock, moving through the restaurant with the purposeful stride of a general inspecting territory she had already conquered. 52 years old, but carrying herself with energy that belonged to someone half her age, every gesture calculated, every step deliberate. Her suit was black Chanel, fitted so precisely it appeared painted onto her frame. Platinum blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon that looked almost painful. Gray eyes that swept the room with cold efficiency, assessing and discarding everything they touched in the same instant. Her entourage followed in formation. A young woman in a gray dress clutched a tablet computer like a shield, fingers perpetually moving across the screen. This was Rebecca Winters, personal assistant, 28 years old, her face arranged in studied neutrality. Two men in expensive suits trailed behind, their expressions carefully blank. Lawyers, most likely, the type who cleaned up problems before they became public. And closest to Victoria walked a silver-haired man whose presence radiated confidence that bordered on arrogance. Gregory Thornton, 58, Chief Financial Officer of Ashford Industries, a name that appeared in business publications almost as frequently as Victoria's own. His eyes reminded Damon of a predator calculating the optimal moment to strike. The party settled into the private dining room, and Damon initiated the careful choreography he had perfected across 3 years. Water poured at the correct angle. Bread presented with practiced elegance. Menu explained in tones that conveyed information without demanding attention. His movements were economical, his voice measured, his entire being compressed into a function that existed solely to make their evening flawless. Victoria's gaze crossed his face for a fraction of a second, and something flickered in her expression. Displeasure, quickly suppressed. She leaned toward Rebecca and spoke in rapid French, her voice pitched low but not low enough. Pourquoi ont-ils assigné quelqu'un comme lui? Why did they assign someone like him? Rebecca offered no response, merely nodded and made a notation on her tablet. Damon maintained his expression of professional blankness, his pulse steady through disciplined effort. He had understood every syllable. His French was not merely functional, but exceptional, refined through years of university study and a natural gift that his professors had called extraordinary. But Victoria Ashford could not know this. She had looked at his skin, at his uniform, at his position in the hierarchy of service, and she had constructed assumptions that seemed to her as solid as fact. He said nothing. Naya needed new glasses. The rent was already 3 weeks late. The first hour passed without incident. Damon circulated among the guests like a ghost, refilling glasses at precisely the right moments, clearing plates with silent efficiency, anticipating needs before they were articulated. The dinner conversation flowed around him, discussions of market positions and acquisition strategies and quarterly projections, the language of power spoken by people who wielded it casually. Gregory Thornton dominated much of the talking, his voice carrying the easy assurance of someone who had spent decades in rooms like this. Victoria listened more than she spoke, her questions cutting to essential points, her gray eyes missing nothing. At 9:15, the careful equilibrium shattered. Damon approached the table with a crystal pitcher to refill water glasses, moving with the deliberate caution he always employed near VIP guests. He leaned slightly to reach Victoria's glass, his body angled to minimize intrusion, when Gregory Thornton pushed his chair backward without warning or acknowledgement. The chair struck Damon's arm with enough force to upset his grip. The pitcher tilted. 3 drops of water, perhaps 4, landed on the sleeve of Victoria's jacket. 3 drops, worth less than a penny, on fabric that probably cost more than Damon earned in a month. Victoria examined her sleeve with theatrical revulsion, as though something far more offensive than water had touched her. Then she raised her eyes to Damon's face, and the temperature of her gaze dropped toward absolute zero. She leaned close, near enough that only he could hear, and began speaking in French. Not the measured French of business negotiations, but something rawer, something that dripped with accumulated contempt. Inutile. Complètement inutile. Her voice barely rose above a whisper, but each word cut like surgical steel. Les gens comme vous ne sont bons qu'au travail manuel, pas à servir quelqu'un comme moi. Useless. Completely useless. People like you are only fit for manual labor, not serving someone like me. She continued, her French accelerating, growing more vicious. Laissez-moi deviner. Un père célibataire pathétique qui ne peut même pas s'occuper correctement de son propre enfant. Et maintenant vous êtes ici, renversant de l'eau sur des gens qui comptent vraiment dans ce monde. Dégoûtant. Vraiment pathétique. Let me guess, a pathetic single father who cannot even properly care for his own child, and now you are here, spilling water on people who actually matter in this world. Disgusting. Truly pathetic. Every word was a blade aimed at his most vulnerable places. At the table, the other guests continued their conversation as though nothing was happening, oblivious to the violence being conducted in a language they did not understand. Rebecca's fingers paused over her tablet for just a moment, her eyes flickering toward Damon before returning to her screen. Damon stood motionless, the pitcher still in his grip, his thoughts racing through the familiar mathematics of survival. The bills on his kitchen table, Naya's sleeping face, Mrs. Patterson's $25, the blacklist that would erase every opportunity in this city. Every instinct commanded him to apologize, to lower his head and absorb the insult as he had absorbed countless insults before, to be invisible, forgettable, safe. But she had mentioned his daughter. She had called him pathetic for being a single father. She had transformed his greatest love into a weapon, in a language she was certain he could not comprehend. Something fundamental shifted inside Damon Holloway. He thought about the words he spoke to Naya every morning, the principle he repeated until she could recite it without prompting. Our dignity does not depend on how much money we have. It depends on how we treat ourselves and others. He had taught his daughter to believe this. The question was whether he believed it himself. He thought about Camille, who had always encouraged him to stand tall, who had fallen in love with him partly because he refused to let anyone diminish him. He thought about the unopened letter in his apartment, her final words waiting in an envelope he had been too afraid to read for 3 years. He thought about the question Nia would someday ask. Daddy, when someone tried to make you small, what did you do? And he knew he could not lie to his daughter. Damon straightened his posture. He looked directly into Victoria Ashford's gray eyes, violating every unwritten rule governing how servers interacted with VIP guests. When he spoke, his French was Parisian standard, polished and precise, the product of university education and years of dedicated study. Madame Ashford, j'ai compris chaque mot que vous venez de dire. Chaque mot. Madame Ashford, I understood every word you just said. Every word. The color evacuated Victoria's face with almost theatrical speed, leaving her complexion the shade of old paper. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. Damon continued in the same measured tone, each word positioned with deliberate care. Je voudrais souligner quelques points, si vous le permettez. Premièrement, vous avez utilisé incorrectement le subjonctif dans votre dernière phrase, une erreur grammaticale qu'une personne véritablement éduquée en français ne commettrait jamais. I would like to point out a few things, if you will permit me. First, you incorrectly used the subjunctive in your last sentence, a grammatical error that anyone with a genuine French education would never make. At the far end of the table, Rebecca Winters had stopped typing. Her eyes were fixed on Damon, something that might have been surprise or respect flickering across her neutral expression. Deuxièmement, vous avez insulté ma fille sans rien savoir d'elle. Elle a 7 ans. Ce matin, elle m'a fait un dessin avec les mots « Je t'aime, papa » écrit en français. Elle est toute la raison pour laquelle je suis ici ce soir, servant des gens comme vous, avalant des insultes pour pouvoir payer son éducation. Second, you insulted my daughter without knowing anything about her. She is 7 years old. This morning, she made me a drawing with the words, "I love you, Daddy," written in French. She is the entire reason I am standing here tonight, serving people like you, swallowing insults so I can pay for her education. Victoria's hand had moved unconsciously to her throat, her fingers pressing against her collarbone as though trying to contain something threatening to escape. Troisièmement, je n'ai pas renversé l'eau. Le monsieur à côté de vous a poussé sa chaise dans mon bras sans regarder. Mais vous ne l'avez pas remarqué, n'est-ce pas? Vous avez vu ce que vous vous attendiez à voir. Un homme noir commettant une erreur qui confirmait tout ce que vous croyez déjà sur les gens qui me ressemblent. Third, I did not spill the water. The gentleman beside you pushed his chair into my arm without looking. But you did not notice that, did you? You saw what you expected to see. A black man making a mistake that confirmed everything you already believed about people who look like me. Gregory Thornton had ceased his conversation entirely now, his fox-like eyes narrowing as he attempted to follow the exchange. The lawyers traded confused glances. Only Rebecca seemed to comprehend what was unfolding, her tablet forgotten in her lap. Mais le plus important est ceci. Damon set the water pitcher on the sideboard with unhurried precision. Ma dignité n'est pas à vendre, pas à vous, pas à personne, à aucun prix. But what matters most is this. My dignity is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone, not at any price. He offered a small bow, correct and formal, conveying respect without any trace of submission. Être père célibataire n'est pas une faiblesse à moquer. Travailler ce travail n'est pas une honte à exploiter. La seule chose honteuse dans cette pièce ce soir, c'est de juger la valeur d'une autre personne par la couleur de sa peau ou le solde de son compte bancaire. Being a single father is not a weakness to be mocked. Working this job is not a shame to be exploited. The only shameful thing in this room tonight is judging another person's worth by the color of their skin or the balance of their bank account. He switched to English, his voice carrying clearly across the room. I apologize sincerely for the water on your sleeve, but I will never apologize for who I am. Silence crashed down on the private dining room like a physical weight. Gregory Thornton sat frozen with a wineglass suspended halfway to his mouth. The lawyers had abandoned their phones entirely. Rebecca Winters observed Damon with an expression he could not interpret, her fingers hovering motionless above her tablet, and Victoria Ashford, the woman whose name made executives stammer and board members perspire, sat in complete stillness, her gray eyes locked on the face of the man who had just refused to be diminished by her contempt. Bernard burst through the door with the panic of someone who had been watching through the window and understood that his world was collapsing. Sweat streamed down his face, his shirt already soaked through. Mr. Holloway. A word. Outside. Immediately. Damon followed him into the corridor without looking back, though he felt Victoria's gaze burning against his spine with the intensity of focused light. The hallway outside the private dining room existed in a different dimension, one where the air tasted of fear and the walls seemed to press inward with accumulated judgment. Bernard paced in frantic circles, his hands running repeatedly through the remnants of his hair. "Do you understand what you have done?" The words emerged as a strangled hiss. That woman could purchase this entire building and terminate every person who works here before she finishes her morning coffee. She could make one telephone call and you would never work anywhere in this city again. She insulted me. She insulted my daughter. I responded with the truth. You responded. Bernard's voice climbed toward a register that suggested approaching hysteria. You were supposed to apologize. You were supposed to bow and thank her for the privilege of being humiliated. That is how this works. That is how it has always worked. Then perhaps how it works is wrong. Bernard stopped pacing and stared at Damon with an expression that blended terror, anger, and something else. Something that might have been envy for a courage he himself had never possessed. You are suspended. Effective immediately. Go home. I will contact you when we determine how to manage the aftermath of this catastrophe. Suspended. Not terminated. Not yet. But the word hung in the atmosphere like a sentence awaiting execution. Damon untied his apron, folded it with care, and placed it on a nearby table. You are not protecting me, Bernard. You are protecting the restaurant. Is there a difference? There is a universe of difference. The elevator descended through 67 floors in silence, and Damon watched his reflection in the polished metal walls. He looked tired. He looked frightened. But he also looked like a man who had remembered something essential about himself, something he had nearly allowed the world to strip away. The November air struck him like a physical blow when he emerged onto the sidewalk. Manhattan sprawled around him, towers of glass and steel reaching toward a sky that never achieved true darkness, millions of lives unfolding in apartments stacked upon apartments, most of them carrying struggles that no one else would ever witness. Damon stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cold, allowing the reality of what he had done to settle into his bones. He had no job. He had no safety net. He had $62 and a pile of bills that would continue growing regardless of his circumstances. He had a daughter who depended on him for everything, and he had just sacrificed his only income source on a moment of pride. But he had not bent. He had not broken. And when Nia asked him someday what he did when someone tried to make him small, he would be able to tell her the truth. The apartment was silent when Damon returned home, filled with the particular quiet of sleeping children and tired old women. Mrs. Patterson had dozed off on the couch, her knitting needles still gripped in weathered hands. He placed $25 on the coffee table, money he could not spare but owed regardless, and guided her gently toward the door. "Everything all right, honey?" She squinted at him through sleep-clouded eyes. "You are home much earlier than usual. Everything is fine, Mrs. Patterson. Thank you for watching her." The door closed, and he stood alone in darkness, the apartment feeling smaller than it had that afternoon, walls pressing closer, air thick with uncertainty and all the forces beyond his control. Damon walked down the short hallway to Nia's room. She lay curled beneath her purple comforter, one arm wrapped around a stuffed teddy bear named Theodore, the final gift Camille had given her before the accident. In her other hand, she still clutched the drawing, the stick figures beneath their yellow sun, the French words declaring her love. He knelt beside her bed and watched her breathe, counting each rise and fall of her small chest. In sleep, her face relaxed and peaceful, she looked so much like Camille that the resemblance produced a physical ache, grief that never fully faded, no matter how many years passed. "I am sorry, baby girl." The whispered words dissolved into darkness. "I do not know what happens next, but I will figure it out. I always figure it out." His gaze moved to her nightstand, to the drawer where a small blue box held the few keepsakes he had preserved from Camille's belongings. Her wedding ring, too small for his finger but too precious to sell. A dried flower from their wedding day. Photographs. And the letter. The envelope was cream-colored, Camille's handwriting elegant across the front. "For Damon, when I am gone." She had written it 2 weeks before the accident, during a period when she had seemed unusually reflective, discussing the future in ways that had made him uncomfortable. He had discovered it in her purse afterward, sealed and waiting. For 3 years he had lacked the courage to open it. Reading her final words felt too much like admitting she was truly gone, like sealing a door he wanted to believe might somehow remain open. His hand moved toward the drawer, then stopped. Not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, he needed to focus on survival, on finding another job before Victoria Ashford's influence could eliminate every opportunity in the city. He kissed Nia's forehead, whispered that he loved her bigger than the sky, and left the room as silently as he had entered. Across Manhattan, in a penthouse that commanded views of the glittering city in every direction, Victoria Ashford discovered that sleep would not come. She stood at floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of Remy Martin Louis XIII cognac untouched in her hand, staring at the lights spread below her like scattered diamonds. The waiter's words kept cycling through her thoughts, refusing to fade into background noise the way other people's words always faded. "My dignity is not for sale, not to you, not to anyone, not at any price." Something about the steadiness in his voice, something about his eyes, exhausted beyond measure, but somehow unbroken, unbowed. She had seen eyes like those before, in a mirror 28 years and a lifetime ago. The memory surfaced without permission, sharp as broken glass pressed against bare skin. Paris, 1996. She was 24 years old, daughter of immigrants who had left France for America when she was 12, who had returned to the country of her birth to prove she belonged there. Working evenings at a restaurant near the Champs-Élysées, saving for business school, serving wealthy tourists who never troubled themselves to learn her name. One night, a group of businessmen drunk on champagne and entitlement had claimed the best table. One of them, wearing an expensive suit and a smile that made her skin crawl, knocked over his glass and immediately blamed her. Inutile. His voice had been loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "Les gens comme vous ne sont bons qu'au travail manuel." Useless. People like you are only fit for manual labor. She remembered the heat flooding her face, the trembling in her hands, the desperate urge to scream or fight back or do anything to push against the injustice of it. She remembered wanting to hurl the broken glass in his smug face, to tell him she was worth more than he could possibly comprehend. Instead, she had apologized. She had knelt and cleaned up his mess while he laughed with his companions about clumsy serving girls. She had swallowed her fury and let it transform into something harder, something that would fuel her for the next 3 decades. That night, walking along the Seine in the rain, she had sworn a promise to herself. She would become so wealthy, so powerful, so untouchable that no one would ever dare speak to her that way again. She would climb so impossibly high that men like him would have to strain their necks just to glimpse her shadow, and she had succeeded. She had clawed her way out of poverty through intelligence and determination alone, built an empire from nothing, transformed herself into the woman CEOs feared and magazines celebrated. But tonight, standing in her penthouse with the city sprawled beneath her like conquered territory, Victoria confronted something that made her physically ill. She had become him, the drunk businessman from the Paris restaurant, the one who looked at working people and saw nothing worth respecting. She had become the very thing she had sworn to destroy. The cognac glass trembled in her grip, and she set it down before she could drop it. Her eyes found her reflection in the dark window, a woman of 52 who possessed everything money could purchase and nothing that truly mattered. Henri Dubois. The name rose in her memory like a ghost demanding acknowledgement. The man who had changed everything, who had given her the first real chance she had ever received. He had owned a small technology company in Paris, had seen something in the angry young waitress that no one else had bothered to seek. He had hired her as an assistant, taught her the business, loaned her $50,000 to come to America and start her own company. Pull others up, he had told her. Never push them down. That is how we repay the chances we are given. She had promised she would remember. She had shattered that promise so completely that she could no longer recognize the woman who had made it. Her phone vibrated. A message forwarded from her assistant in a different time zone. Mr. Henri Dubois passed away peacefully this morning in Paris. Services will be held Tuesday. Victoria read the words 3 times. Henri was gone. The only person who had believed in her when she was nothing. The man whose faith had made everything else possible. And she had not spoken to him in 5 years. Too consumed with building her empire to remember the foundation upon which it stood. She retrieved her phone and called Rebecca's number. It rang twice before her assistant answered, alert despite the hour. Rebecca, I need information about the waiter from tonight. His name is Damon. I want his complete file on my desk by 7 in the morning. A pause. To file a complaint. Victoria studied her reflection in the window. The woman she had become against the woman she had promised to be. No, to apologize. The call ended, and she stood alone in her penthouse, surrounded by everything she had ever desired and nothing she actually needed. Tomorrow she would attempt to repair what she had destroyed. Tomorrow she would try something she had not attempted in 28 years. Tomorrow she would try to become someone worth respecting again. But tonight, the waiter's words echoed through her empty rooms like a verdict from which there was no appeal. My dignity is not for sale. Not to you. Not to anyone. Not at any price. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria Ashford wondered whether she possessed any dignity left worth selling. The morning arrived with pale November light filtering through grimy windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted through the apartment like tiny ghosts. Damon had not slept. The hours between returning home and watching the sky brighten had been spent at the kitchen table, staring at envelopes whose contents he already knew by heart, calculating futures that narrowed with every passing minute. $62 would not cover the electricity bill. The electricity bill would not matter if he could not pay rent. The rent would become irrelevant if Victoria Ashford destroyed his ability to work anywhere in the city. Each problem connected to the next in an endless chain, links forged from circumstances he had not chosen and could not escape. Nia emerged from her bedroom at 7:15, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her purple glasses slightly crooked on her nose. She stopped in the doorway when she saw him still wearing yesterday's clothes, and her face shifted into an expression of concern that no 7-year-old should have mastered. Daddy, did you sleep? I rested, baby girl. Come on, let us get you breakfast before school. The refrigerator offered limited options, half a carton of eggs, milk approaching its expiration date, leftover rice from 3 nights earlier. Damon scrambled the eggs with more attention than they deserved, watching Naya settle into her chair and pull out the French drawing she had made the previous morning. The crayon letters were smudged from being held through the night, but the words remained legible. Je t'aime, Papa. After breakfast, Damon decided they would walk to the corner bodega together. The milk was nearly gone, and Nia needed something in her stomach besides eggs. The store 3 blocks away sold small cartons for $1.50, cheap enough to justify even with $62 standing between him and complete financial collapse. The November air carried the bite of approaching winter, and Nia's breath emerged in small clouds as she held his hand and chattered about a dream involving a purple elephant who lived in a library. Damon listened with half his attention, the other half cataloging storefronts they passed, calculating which might be hiring, estimating how long he could survive before the landlord's patience expired entirely. The bodega was warm and cramped, shelves crowded with canned goods and snacks and all the small necessities of urban survival. Damon guided Nia toward the dairy cooler, his eyes scanning prices automatically, the mental arithmetic of poverty that had become second nature over 3 years. A woman stood near the register, white, mid-40s, examining organic crackers with the intensity of someone performing surgery. When Damon and Nia passed her on the way to the milk, her eyes tracked them with undisguised suspicion. The cashier, a young man Damon recognized from previous visits, observed the interaction with visible discomfort but remained silent. Damon selected a carton of milk and a small box of cereal, totaling the cost in his head. $3.70. He could afford it. Barely. As they approached the register, the woman in the cardigan spoke without looking directly at them, her voice pitched to carry throughout the small store. I hope you are planning to pay for those items. One can never be too careful in neighborhoods like this. Nia's hand tightened around Damon's fingers. She had heard. Children always heard the things adults wished they could take back. The cashier's face reddened. Ma'am, they are regular customers here. The woman shrugged with elaborate indifference, communicating that she had made her point and felt no obligation to defend it. I am just saying. You never know with some people. Damon felt the familiar heat of anger rising through his chest, the same fire that had ignited in the private dining room of Lumiere. But this time his daughter was watching. This time the lesson he taught would be remembered. He paid for his items, accepted his change, and guided Nia toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back. Ma'am, I hope someday you find it in yourself to judge people by their character rather than their appearance. It would make the world a better place, and it might make you a better person. The woman's mouth opened and closed without producing sound. The cashier ducked his head to hide what might have been a smile. Outside, the cold air hit them again, but something in Damon's chest felt lighter. Nia tugged at his hand, her face tilted upward. Daddy? Why did that lady look at us like that? Damon knelt on the frozen sidewalk, bringing himself to her eye level, ignoring the cold seeping through his pants. Some people make judgments about others based on what they look like, baby girl. The color of their skin, or the clothes they wear, or where they live. They decide who someone is without taking time to actually know them. But that is not fair. No, it is not. And when people treat us that way, we have a choice. We can become angry and mean, just like them. Or we can remember who we are and refuse to let their smallness change us. Nia considered this with gravity beyond her years. Our dignity does not depend on money, or on what mean people think. That is exactly right. He pulled her into a hug, holding her against the cold and the cruelty of a world that would never stop testing them. I love you bigger than the sky. Bigger than the sky, Daddy. They walked home through streets awakening to another day, past coffee shops and dry cleaners and all the ordinary commerce of ordinary lives. Damon did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if Victoria Ashford would destroy his career or if he would find another job, or if the landlord would finally lose patience. But his daughter had watched him stand up for their dignity twice in 12 hours, and that lesson was worth more than any paycheck. The black car was waiting outside their building when they returned. A Mercedes, sleek and gleaming, so obviously expensive it looked alien, parked on their Brooklyn street. A young woman in a gray dress stood beside it, holding an envelope, her posture projecting the professional patience that came from years of waiting for important people. "Mr. Holloway?" The voice was calm, measured. "I am Rebecca Winters, personal assistant to Victoria Ashford. Ashford requests your presence at Ashford Industries headquarters this morning. A car will take you there if you choose to accept." Damon studied the envelope she extended, his thoughts cycling through possibilities. A lawsuit, a formal complaint, some elaborate retaliation designed to humiliate him further before destroying what remained of his life. "She asked me to give you this." Rebecca's expression remained neutral, but something in her eyes suggested knowledge she was not sharing. She said, "To tell you this is not revenge. This is a conversation." Damon accepted the envelope. His name appeared on the front in elegant handwriting, script that suggested expensive education and careful attention to detail. Inside was a single card bearing an address on Fifth Avenue and one handwritten line. "This is not revenge. This is a conversation. I need to take my daughter inside first. The car will wait, Mr. Holloway. Take whatever time you need, Mrs." Patterson answered on the second knock, still in her bathrobe, surprise evident on her face. Damon explained briefly that something unexpected had arisen, that he needed to leave for a few hours, that he would pay extra for the inconvenience. The elderly woman waved away his offers and ushered Nia inside with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime solving problems for others. Descending the stairs, Damon paused outside his own apartment door. The envelope was still in his hand, the words burning through the paper. "This is not revenge. This is a conversation." He did not believe it. People like Victoria Ashford did not request conversations with people like him. They dispatched lawyers and issued statements and wielded their power like weapons. They did not write notes in their own handwriting. They did not send cars and wait for acceptance. But the alternative was sitting in his apartment, watching his savings dwindle to nothing while bills accumulated around him. At least, this way he would know what he faced. He descended the final flight of stairs and climbed into the Mercedes. The drive to Manhattan took 40 minutes through morning traffic, and Damon spent every one of them watching Brooklyn transform into Midtown's gleaming towers through tinted windows. Two worlds separated by a river and a lifetime of accumulated wealth. He had moved between them for years, invisible in both, belonging to neither. The Mercedes stopped before a glass tower that seemed to pierce the sky like an accusation. Ashford Industries occupied floors 40 through 52, a vertical empire controlling billions in technology investments. Damon had read about the company in magazines, had served executives who dropped its name in casual conversation, had never imagined entering through the front door rather than a service entrance. The lobby was cathedral vast, all marble and steel and hushed voices, designed to make visitors feel the weight of power they were approaching. Security guards in dark suits nodded as he passed, clearly expecting him. An elevator whisked him upward without stopping, floors counting past on the digital display like a countdown to something he could not name. Rebecca was waiting when the doors opened, leading him through a maze of glass-walled offices toward a corner suite commanding views in every direction. The journey provided time to notice employees they passed, curious glances, whispered conversations that ceased as he approached. He was an anomaly here, a disruption in the careful order of things, and everyone recognized it. The office they reached was not what he had expected. No gold or excessive luxury, no trophies of conquest displayed on shelves. The space was minimalist and calm, light wood floors and simple furniture and a single piece of calligraphy framed on the wall. The French words read, "La dignité ne peut être ni achetée ni vendue." Dignity can neither be bought nor sold. Victoria Ashford stood behind a desk of dark wood, watching him enter. She appeared different from the previous night, smaller somehow, less armored. Her platinum hair fell loose around her shoulders instead of being pulled back, and the severe black suit had been replaced by a simple gray blouse. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable, as though she had removed a mask worn so long she had forgotten it was there. "Mr. Holloway, thank you for coming. I came because I want to understand what this is. Your note said it is not revenge. So what is it?" Victoria moved toward the window, turning her back to him, silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed, some professional veneer stripped away to reveal something rawer underneath. "I owe you an apology. What I said last night was inexcusable. I made assumptions about you based on your appearance and your job, and every one of those assumptions was wrong. Yes, they were. I have spent the past 12 hours examining why I said those things, trying to understand what made me capable of such cruelty." She turned to face him, and I realized something deeply uncomfortable about myself. The morning light caught her features, revealing fatigue lines around her eyes, evidence of a sleepless night that mirrored his own. 28 years ago, I was exactly where you are now. Different circumstances, different country, but fundamentally the same situation. A customer in a restaurant looked at me and saw nothing worth respecting. He called me useless, pathetic, told me I was only fit for manual labor. Damon remained silent, but his defensive posture softened by degrees. I made a promise that night, that I would become so powerful no one would ever speak to me that way again. And I kept that promise. I built everything I dreamed of building. But somewhere along the way, I became the exact person I had sworn to destroy. She walked back to her desk, fingers brushing across a framed photograph Damon had not noticed earlier. An older man with kind eyes and white hair, his smile gentle. "This is Henri Dubois. He was the only person who gave me a chance when I was nobody. He loaned me money to come to America, to start my company. He made me promise that when I succeeded, I would use my position to help others climb." "Pull them up," he said. "Never push them down." The photograph seemed to glow in morning light, a window into a past that explained at least part of the present. He died yesterday morning, in Paris. I received the message just before going to the restaurant, and instead of honoring his memory, I took my grief out on a stranger who had done nothing wrong. "On you." Damon studied her face, searching for signs of performance, for calculated regret designed to serve some hidden purpose. He found neither. What he observed instead was a woman confronting something ugly about herself and finding no way to look away. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because last night you did something no one has done in years. You held up a mirror and forced me to see what I had become. I did not like what I saw. But that is precisely why I need someone like you." "Need me for what?" Victoria retrieved a folder from her desk and opened it. Damon glimpsed printed pages, official documents, his own name appearing multiple times. "I researched you this morning. Damon Holloway, linguistics student at Columbia University, top of your class before family circumstances forced you to leave. Fluent in 4 languages, English, French, Spanish, and German. Your professor, Eleanor Whitfield, called you one of the rarest linguistic talents she had encountered in 30 years of teaching." Damon felt his past reaching up to reclaim him. All those years of study and ambition buried under grief and bills and the grinding labor of survival. "I am offering you a position, Director of International Translation and Coordination. You would serve as primary bridge between our offices in Paris, Berlin, and New York, facilitating communication across languages and cultures." She presented the numbers with precision refined through decades of billion-dollar negotiations. $120,000 annual salary. Comprehensive health insurance covering him and Nia. A flexible schedule allowing him to drop her at school and pick her up every afternoon. 4 weeks paid vacation. Educational benefits enabling him to complete his degree. Damon absorbed the figures as they cascaded past, each more impossible than the last. 6 times his current income. Insurance covering Nia's glasses and dental work and all the medical care he had been postponing. Time with his daughter instead of ships passing in the night. Why? The question emerged rougher than intended. You could find dozens of qualified candidates. People with completed degrees. People who did not embarrass you in front of your business partners. Because I do not need another person who tells me what I want to hear. I have an entire company full of those already. What I need is someone who will tell me the truth even when it is uncomfortable. You did that last night in circumstances where anyone else would have remained silent. That is something I cannot teach and cannot buy. Damon considered the folder in her hands, the research she had conducted, the calculated precision of this offer. It was too good, too perfect, too precisely calibrated to his desperation. If I were to consider this, I would have conditions. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. Name them. 3 things. First, you will never insult or discriminate against me or any employee because of their race, background, or circumstances. Not publicly, not privately, not in any language you assume they cannot understand. If I witness you speaking to anyone the way you spoke to me last night, I walk away immediately. No second chances. Agreed. Second, my daughter is my absolute priority. I leave the office by 3:30 every day to pick her up from school. I have dinner with her every evening. This schedule is not negotiable regardless of what meetings are scheduled or what crises are unfolding. That can be arranged. Damon paused. The third condition was the one that mattered most, the one that would reveal whether Victoria's remorse was genuine or simply a more sophisticated form of manipulation. Third, I want you to establish a scholarship fund for children from underprivileged backgrounds who demonstrate talent for languages. Kids like I was when I was young, intelligent and capable, but without financial resources to develop their abilities. 30 children per year, full support for their education. Named after your mentor. Victoria's expression shifted, uncertainty replacing confidence. A scholarship fund of that nature would require significant resources and board approval. Gregory Thornton and others would fight it. I cannot promise that unilaterally. Then we do not have a deal. Damon stood, preparing to leave. He had anticipated this moment during the drive over, had made peace with the possibility that his principles would cost him this opportunity. Some things mattered more than money. Wait. He stopped, but did not turn around. I cannot promise the board will approve it immediately. These things require time, persuasion, building consensus. It could take 6 months. It could take a year. But I can promise you this. I will personally advocate for that fund in every board meeting. I will fight for it until it becomes reality, however long that takes. You have my word. Damon turned to study her face. Your word. Last night, your word was used to humiliate me. I know. And that is exactly why I need the chance to prove I can be better. Not because I deserve it. I do not. But because you reminded me of someone I had forgotten I ever was. He thought about Nia, asking why he always left when she was sleeping. He thought about $62 and 3 weeks of overdue rent. He thought about Camille, who had always believed in second chances, in the capacity of people to change, in extending grace even to those who had not earned it. I will try. But understand this clearly. The moment you break your word, I am gone. No explanations. No negotiations. Victoria extended her hand. It trembled slightly, barely visible vibration betraying emotions she was working to contain. Fair enough. They shook, and Damon felt something shift in the architecture of his life. A door opening onto a corridor he had never imagined walking. When can you start? Monday. I am going to spend this weekend with my daughter. The first 3 months tested every assumption Damon had made about his capacity to endure. He started at Ashford Industries on a Monday morning in late November, walking through the same lobby that had seemed so intimidating a week earlier, wearing a suit the company had provided. The employees he passed no longer looked at him with mere curiosity. Now their eyes held speculation and suspicion, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. The rumors began before his first day ended. The CEO hired a waiter. There must be something going on between them. He probably threatened to sue, and this is hush money. Nobody knew the real story, and in the absence of facts, imagination constructed theories far more scandalous than reality. Gregory Thornton emerged as the most significant obstacle. The CFO had occupied his position for 15 years, had navigated the company through economic turbulence, had expected that when Victoria eventually retired, he would be the natural choice to succeed her. Damon's sudden appearance, his unexplained closeness to the CEO, his access to meetings Thornton himself was excluded from, all of it represented a threat the older man could not ignore. In the second week, Damon discovered he had been removed from several email distribution lists without explanation. In the third week, a report he had prepared vanished from the shared drive, forcing him to recreate 3 days of work from memory. In the fourth week, he arrived for a meeting about the Paris expansion, only to find the time had been changed and no one had informed him. He documented everything. Dates and times and evidence, building a paper trail that might become necessary if Thornton's campaign escalated. But he did not complain to Victoria. He refused to give his enemies the satisfaction of watching him seek protection. Whatever battles lay ahead, he would fight them on his own terms. Nia's school called in December, with news that transformed his understanding of what his daughter faced every day. "Mr. Holloway, this is Principal Davidson. There was an incident today involving Nia. She is not hurt, but I think you should come in." The meeting took place in a small conference room adjacent to the principal's office, fluorescent lights humming overhead, institutional furniture arranged in configurations designed for difficult conversations. Nia sat in a chair too large for her, feet dangling above the floor, her purple glasses slightly crooked. Principal Davidson, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes, explained what had happened. During lunch, an older student had told Nia she did not belong at the school because people who looked like her could not afford the tuition. When Nia responded that her father worked very hard to pay for her education, the student had laughed and said her father was probably a criminal because that was how black people made money. Nia had not cried. She had looked at the older student and said, very calmly, that her dignity did not depend on what mean people thought, and then she had walked away to eat lunch alone. The older student had been disciplined, Principal Davidson assured him. The school had a zero-tolerance policy for such behavior, but she wanted Damon to know so he could talk to Nia about processing the experience. In the car on the way home, Damon glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window, unusually quiet. "Baby girl, do you want to talk about what happened today?" "That boy was wrong, Daddy." She did not look away from the window. "He said mean things because he does not know us. But I remembered what you taught me." "What did you remember?" "That our dignity does not depend on money, or on what mean people think. That we get to decide who we are, not them." Damon pulled the car to the side of the road, put it in park, and turned around to face her. "I am so proud of you, Nia. What you did today was very brave." "I was not brave, Daddy. I was just telling the truth. Sometimes telling the truth is the bravest thing a person can do." Her eyes finally met his, and he saw something in them that had not been there before. Not sadness exactly, but a new awareness that the world contained people who would judge her for things she could not control. "Daddy, why do some people not like us?" The question hung in the air of the car, heavy with implications that reached far beyond a 7-year-old's understanding. "Some people are afraid of what they do not understand, baby girl. And instead of trying to learn, they decide to be mean. It is not about us. It is about something broken inside them. Can we fix them? We cannot fix other people. But we can choose how we respond. We can choose to stay kind even when others are cruel. We can choose to hold on to who we are even when the world tries to make us smaller." Nia considered this for a long moment. I think Mommy would be proud of me too. The mention of Camille struck Damon like a physical blow, unexpected and precise. Yes, baby girl. Mommy would be very proud. She would say you are braver than the sky is big, bigger than the sky. Nia smiled for the first time since he had picked her up. That is a lot of brave. Yes, it is. The Paris negotiation changed everything. Ashford Industries had been working for 18 months to acquire a French technology company, a transaction valued at $2.3 billion that would establish the firm's presence in the European market. The talks had stalled repeatedly, the French executives growing increasingly frustrated with what they perceived as American arrogance and cultural insensitivity. Damon was not supposed to be in the video conference when the breakthrough occurred. He had been summoned to provide translation support, to sit in the corner and clarify terminology when the official interpreter stumbled. But as the meeting progressed, he watched dynamics unfold with growing alarm. The French team was not objecting to business terms. They were objecting to how they were being treated. The American executives, Thornton prominent among them, kept interrupting, kept dismissing concerns with assurances rather than substantive responses, kept signaling through countless small gestures that they viewed themselves as the dominant party. Every interruption, every dismissive wave, every failure to observe proper protocols was a wound accumulating toward fatal injury. The lead French negotiator, a silver-haired man named Laurent Marchand, had grown visibly tense. His responses had become clipped, formal, the icy politeness that in French culture signaled complete rejection. The interpreter captured words but missed meaning entirely. Thornton was explaining why French concerns about corporate culture were unnecessary when Damon spoke. Excuse me. Something important is being lost in translation here. Every head turned toward him. Thornton's face reddened with immediate fury. We have an interpreter for that. The interpreter is translating words, but Monsieur Marchand is communicating something that is not being heard. Damon turned toward the screen where the French delegation sat, and when he spoke, his French was Parisian standard, polished through years of study. Monsieur Marchand, je comprends que vous avez des préoccupations qui n'ont pas été correctement adressées. Permettez-moi de vous assurer qu'Ashford Industries respecte profondément la culture d'entreprise que vous avez construite. Nous ne cherchons pas à absorber votre identité, mais à créer un partenariat où les deux parties sont valorisées également. The change in Marchand's expression was immediate and dramatic. His shoulders relaxed. The tension around his eyes softened. Vous parlez français remarquablement bien, Monsieur Holloway, et vous comprenez ce que vos collègues ne semblent pas saisir. What followed was 20 minutes of direct conversation between Damon and the French team, conducted entirely in their language, addressing concerns that had festered for months because no one on the American side had bothered to truly listen. By the end of the call, Marchand had agreed to continue negotiations, and the deal that seemed dead an hour earlier was back on track. The Paris acquisition closed 3 months later, valued at $2.8 billion, $500 million more than originally projected, largely because the French team had developed sufficient trust in Ashford Industries to agree to more favorable terms. Victoria ensured every executive in the company knew who had saved the deal, and Damon's position transformed overnight from suspicious newcomer to indispensable asset. Thornton's hostility did not diminish with Damon's success. If anything, it intensified. The anonymous message arrived at 11 o'clock on a Thursday night, 6 months after Damon had started at Ashford Industries. He was working late, reviewing translation documents for upcoming negotiations, when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The words made his blood freeze. If you want to know the truth about Gregory Thornton, examine the folder marked Confidential 2024 on the financial server. He has been betraying this company for 2 years. You have 48 hours before evidence is deleted. Damon stared at the screen, thoughts racing through possibilities. A trap designed to get him fired for accessing confidential files. A genuine whistleblower too afraid to come forward publicly. a test of loyalty orchestrated by someone he had not yet identified. He forwarded the message to his personal email, then deleted it from his phone. If this was a trap, he would not be caught holding evidence. If genuine, he needed verification before taking action. The following morning, he found Rebecca Winters in the break room, her perpetual tablet nowhere visible, her professional armor momentarily lowered as she stirred cream into her coffee. Over the past 6 months, Damon had gradually revised his assessment of Victoria's assistant. Rebecca had witnessed the incident at Lumiere. She had observed Victoria's transformation with what seemed like genuine approval, and she had dropped small hints suggesting she understood more about company politics than she revealed. "I need to speak with you. Somewhere private." Rebecca's eyes sharpened, but she nodded without questions. "Follow me." She led him to a small conference room on the 48th floor, windowless, and closed the door behind them. "What is happening?" Damon showed her the message. "Someone sent this last night. I do not know if it is genuine or a setup." Rebecca studied the text, her expression shifting from curiosity to something darker. "I have been wondering when this would surface. I have suspected Thornton for months." "You knew?" "I suspected. There is a difference. 6 months ago, we lost a major bid to a competitor. They submitted an offer exactly $50,000 higher than ours. That is too precise for coincidence. Someone leaked our numbers. You think it was Thornton. I think he has been playing a long game, positioning himself for something larger than waiting for Victoria to retire. But I could never prove it." Damon felt the weight of decision settling onto his shoulders. Accessing confidential files without authorization could end his career. But if Thornton was genuinely betraying the company, the damage could be catastrophic. "Can you get me access to that folder?" Rebecca hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "I will need to be careful. If we are wrong about this, we are both finished. But if we are right, someone needs to stop him before he destroys everything Victoria has built." That evening, they worked together in Rebecca's office, accessing the financial server through channels technically legitimate but practically invisible. The folder marked Confidential 2024 was buried 3 levels deep, protected by encryption. Rebecca bypassed with an administrator password she was not supposed to possess. The contents exceeded Damon's worst expectations. 2 years of emails between Thornton and executives at a competing technology firm. Strategic documents shared in violation of every confidentiality agreement. Pricing information leaked before major bids, and at the bottom of the folder, a draft contract offering Thornton the CEO position at the competitor once Ashford Industries had been sufficiently weakened. "He is not just leaking information." Damon's voice barely rose above a whisper. "He is actively trying to destroy the company from inside." "There is more." Rebecca pulled up another document dated just 3 days earlier. "He has been communicating with someone on the team handling the next Paris follow-up meeting. Look at this." The email thread revealed a plan to sabotage ongoing negotiations with the French partners, feeding contradictory information to create conflicts that would collapse the relationship. The video conference with Paris was scheduled for the following morning. "We have to tell Victoria." "Not yet." Rebecca's voice carried unexpected urgency. "If we go to her now with evidence obtained this way, Thornton will claim we hacked the system. He has allies on the board. This needs careful handling." "Then what do you suggest?" "We let him make his move tomorrow. The evidence proves what he has been doing, but it does not catch him in the act. If we document his sabotage attempt during the actual meeting, we have him completely. No one can claim fabrication." Damon considered the risk, the possibility Thornton might succeed in destroying the Paris relationship before they could intervene. The damage to hundreds of employees who had no idea their CFO was working against them. And if he succeeds, he will not succeed. Rebecca's eyes held determination Damon had not observed before. "Because you will be in that meeting, and you will do exactly what you did 6 months ago." That night, Damon called home to speak with Naya. Mrs. Patterson answered and put her on the line, and the sound of his daughter's voice cut through tension that had been building all day. "Daddy, are you coming home soon?" "Tomorrow, baby girl. After an important meeting. Are you scared?" The question arrived unexpectedly, carrying her uncanny perception. "A little bit. But sometimes we have to do hard things, even when they frighten us. Our dignity does not depend on money." Naya's voice was firm, repeating the lesson he had taught her. "And you always do the right thing." Damon felt his throat tighten. "I try, baby girl. I try. I love you bigger than the sky, Daddy. Bigger than the sky." He ended the call and sat alone in his office, gazing at the Manhattan skyline, at lights of a city that never slept, at towers of glass and steel housing dreams and ambitions and betrayals in equal measure. In his desk drawer lay a cream-colored envelope he had brought from home that morning, Camille's handwriting elegant across the front. "For Damon, when I am gone." He had carried it with him for 6 months now, taking it out occasionally, holding it, putting it back. Tomorrow might be the day he finally needed to read what was inside, but not tonight. Tonight he needed to prepare for the confrontation ahead, to ensure that when the moment came, he would be ready. Tomorrow, everything changes. The thought arrived unbidden, carrying the weight of every choice that had led to this moment. The restaurant where he had refused to bend, the job offer he had accepted against instinct, the evidence now secured that could destroy one man's career and potentially save a company. Damon looked at the envelope one more time, then locked it in his drawer and turned back to the documents spread across his desk. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it standing. The morning of the Paris video conference arrived with the kind of gray winter light that made Manhattan's towers look like tombstones rising from concrete. Damon had slept for perhaps 2 hours, his mind cycling through scenarios and contingencies, preparing for a confrontation that would either vindicate everything he had risked or destroy it completely. He reached the office at 6:30, 90 minutes before the scheduled call, and found Rebecca already waiting in the conference room with coffee and documents spread across the table. Her face showed the same exhaustion he felt, the weight of secrets carried through a sleepless night. "Everything is in place." Her voice was low despite the empty room. "I have isolated the evidence on a secure drive that Thornton cannot access. When he makes his move, we will have documentation of the attempt alongside proof of his 2-year betrayal. And if he does not make a move, he will." Rebecca's certainty carried the conviction of someone who had watched a predator circle its prey for months. He has too much invested to stop now. The competing firm is expecting results. If this Paris relationship survives, his value to them diminishes significantly. Damon nodded and turned to the window, watching the city brighten as morning traffic began its daily crawl through streets far below. Somewhere in Brooklyn, Nia was waking up, eating breakfast with Mrs. Patterson, preparing for school without knowing that her father was about to gamble everything on a moment of truth. The cream-colored envelope sat in his jacket pocket, Camille's final words still unread. He had brought it again today, some instinct telling him that whatever happened in the next few hours, he would need her voice to guide him through. The conference room filled gradually as 8 o'clock approached. Victoria arrived at 7:45, her gray eyes sharp despite whatever sleep she had or had not gotten, her platinum hair pulled back in the severe style she wore for important meetings. She nodded at Damon but said nothing, taking her position at the head of the table with the practiced authority of someone who had commanded thousands of such gatherings. Gregory Thornton entered at 7:55, silver hair immaculately styled, his fox-like eyes sweeping the room before settling on Damon with barely concealed contempt. He took the seat directly across from Victoria, positioning himself as her equal rather than her subordinate, a small act of defiance that spoke volumes about his intentions. The legal team filed in next, followed by two junior executives whose names Damon had never learned, and finally Rebecca, who positioned herself near the door with her tablet ready, her role as assistant providing cover for her true purpose as witness. At precisely 8 o'clock, the screen at the far end of the room flickered to life, revealing the Paris office of their French partners. Laurent Marchand sat at the center of the frame, flanked by his own team of executives and lawyers, his silver hair and measured expression projecting the gravitas of a man who had built empires through patience and precision. Bonjour, mes amis. Marchand's voice carried warmth that had been absent from their earlier negotiations, warmth that Damon had helped cultivate over 6 months of careful relationship building. I trust we can resolve the remaining issues efficiently today. Victoria leaned forward. Monsieur Marchand, we appreciate your continued partnership. I believe we have addressed your concerns regarding cultural integration and operational autonomy. Indeed you have. Marchand's eyes found Damon through the camera. And I must say, having Monsieur Holloway as our primary liaison has made all the difference. His understanding of our perspective has been invaluable. Thornton shifted in his seat, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. If I may interject, there are some financial considerations we need to revisit before finalizing terms. Victoria's eyebrows rose slightly. Financial considerations? The terms were settled last week, Gregory. New information has come to light regarding projected revenues from the European market. Thornton opened a folder and began distributing papers around the table. Our analysis suggests the current valuation significantly overestimates potential returns. I recommend we renegotiate the purchase price downward by 15%. Damon watched Marchand's expression shift on the screen, warmth cooling toward the icy formality that had characterized their earliest interactions. This was the sabotage, elegant in its simplicity. Questioning the valuation at this stage would signal bad faith to partners who had already made significant concessions. The French would walk away, and Thornton would have plausible deniability for destroying a deal worth billions. But Damon had spent 6 months learning how Laurent Marchand thought, how French business culture operated, how trust once broken could never be fully restored. He understood what was happening, and more importantly, he understood how to stop it. If I may. Damon's voice cut through the tension before anyone else could respond. I have reviewed the projections Mr. Thornton is referencing, and I believe there are significant errors in the underlying assumptions. Thornton's face reddened. You are a translator, Holloway. Financial analysis is beyond your purview. You are correct that my title involves translation. But translation is not merely converting words from one language to another. It is understanding context, nuance, and intention. Damon stood and walked toward the screen, positioning himself so both the room and the Paris office could see him clearly. And the context of these projections suggests they were designed to reach a predetermined conclusion rather than reflect market reality. He turned to face Thornton directly. The data sources cited in your analysis do not exist. I checked them this morning. 3 of the 5 market reports you reference were never published by the institutions you attribute them to. You fabricated evidence to justify destroying this partnership. The room went silent. Victoria's eyes had narrowed to steel points. On the screen, Marchand leaned forward with sudden intensity. Thornton rose from his chair, his composure cracking. This is absurd. I will not be accused of fabrication by someone who was serving appetizers 6 months ago. Then perhaps you can explain this. Rebecca stepped forward, tablet in hand, and connected it to the room's display system. The screen split, showing the Paris office on one side and a series of emails on the other. These are communications between Mr. Thornton and executives at Meridian Technologies, our primary competitor, spanning the past 2 years. The emails scrolled past, each one more damning than the last. Pricing information shared before major bids, strategic documents forwarded without authorization, and finally, a draft employment contract offering Thornton the CEO position at Meridian once he had successfully undermined Ashford Industries from within. Victoria's voice was ice. "Gregory, is this accurate?" Thornton's face had gone pale, his fox-like confidence evaporating as the trap closed around him. "This is clearly fabricated. They must have planted these files to frame me. The metadata is intact." Rebecca's voice remained calm, professional, utterly devastating. "Timestamps, IP addresses, everything. Our IT security team has already verified authenticity. These emails were sent from your computer, using your credentials, over a period of 26 months. On the screen, Marchand spoke quietly to someone off camera, then turned back with an expression that mixed disgust with something approaching respect. "Madame Ashford, it appears we owe you and Monsieur Holloway a debt of gratitude. If this sabotage had succeeded, both our companies would have suffered greatly." Victoria stood, her posture radiating controlled fury. "Monsieur Marchand, I apologize for this disruption. I assure you that Mr. Thornton's actions do not reflect the values of Ashford Industries. He will be dealt with accordingly." She pressed a button on the conference phone. "Security to the main conference room. Immediately." The next few minutes unfolded with the mechanical efficiency of a system designed for exactly this purpose. Two security guards entered and positioned themselves on either side of Thornton, who had stopped protesting and now stood in silence, his political calculations clearly shifting toward damage control and legal strategy. "Gregory Thornton, your employment with Ashford Industries is terminated effective immediately." Victoria's voice carried across the room like a verdict. "You will be escorted from the building. Your access credentials have been revoked. Legal action will follow." Thornton's eyes swept the room one final time, settling on Damon with hatred that would have been frightening if it still carried any power. "You think you have won something here." His voice was quiet, venomous. "You are still just a waiter who got lucky. You do not belong in this world." Damon met his gaze without flinching. "You are right that I do not belong in your world, a world of betrayal and broken promises, but I never wanted to belong there. I belong in a world where people tell the truth and stand by their commitments, where dignity matters more than profit, where the measure of a person is not how much they can take from others, but how much they can give." He paused, and when he continued, his voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. "My dignity is not for sale. Not to you, not to anyone, not at any price, and neither is the dignity of the people you tried to destroy." Security escorted Thornton from the room. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow sounded like a gavel falling. On the screen, Marchand began to applaud. The sound was picked up by other members of the French delegation and then by people in the conference room itself. A spontaneous acknowledgement of something that had shifted in the atmosphere, some balance that had been restored. Victoria waited for the applause to fade before speaking. "Monsieur Marchand, I believe we have some papers to sign. The Paris deal closed that afternoon. Final value confirmed at $2.8 billion. But Damon barely registered the magnitude of the number. His thoughts had already moved to what came next, to the promise Victoria had made 6 months earlier, to the scholarship fund that still required board approval. He found her in her office after the celebrations had wound down, the Manhattan skyline glowing orange and pink through her windows as the sun descended toward the Hudson River. Gregory's seat on the board is now vacant. Victoria did not look up from the documents she was reviewing. The emergency meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning. I intend to use the opportunity to push for the scholarship fund." Damon remained standing near the door. "The board rejected it twice before. What makes you think tomorrow will be different?" "Because tomorrow I will not be asking." Victoria finally raised her eyes to meet his. "I will be demanding. Gregory's betrayal exposed failures in our corporate governance. The board needs to demonstrate renewed commitment to our values. The scholarship fund is how they will do it. And if they still refuse?" then I will make clear that my continued leadership of this company depends on their cooperation. Victoria's expression softened slightly. Henri Dubois did not just give me money, Damon. He gave me a chance to become someone worth being. I failed to honor that gift for too long. I will not fail again. Damon nodded and turned to leave, but her voice stopped him at the door. The letter. The one you have been carrying in your jacket for months. I have seen you take it out and put it back a dozen times. He did not ask how she knew. Victoria Ashford had built an empire by noticing details that others missed. It is from my wife. He did not turn around. She wrote it before she died. I have not been able to open it. Perhaps tonight is the night. Perhaps it is. The apartment was quiet when Damon arrived home, Mrs. Patterson dozing on the couch with her knitting, Nia already asleep in her room. He paid the elderly woman and helped her to the door, then stood alone in the darkness of his kitchen, the cream-colored envelope in his hands. 3 years he had carried this weight, afraid that reading Camille's final words would make her death permanent in some way it had not been before. 3 years of holding on to an envelope, as though the act of not opening it could keep some part of her alive. But tonight, something had changed. He had stood in a room full of powerful people and spoken truth that could have destroyed him. He had watched a man who tried to corrupt everything around him escorted away in disgrace. He had proven that dignity and principle could prevail against wealth and cynicism. If he could do all that, he could read a letter from the woman he loved. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where he had stared at overdue bills and calculated impossible futures, and carefully opened the envelope. The paper inside was cream-colored, covered in Camille's elegant handwriting, and as he began to read, he could hear her voice as clearly as if she were sitting beside him. My dearest Damon, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are carrying a weight that no one should have to carry alone. I wrote this letter because I know you, because I know that your first instinct will be to disappear into grief and sacrifice everything you are to keep Nia safe. You will work jobs that crush your spirit. You will swallow insults from people who are not worthy of speaking your name. You will forget that you were ever anything more than a function designed to keep our daughter fed. I need you to stop. Not the working, not the providing. Those things matter, but the forgetting, the disappearing, the slow erosion of the man I fell in love with, the man who could speak 4 languages and dreamed of connecting people across every divide, the man whose dignity was so bright it lit up every room he entered. You have a gift, Damon, not just for languages, but for seeing the humanity in everyone you meet, for treating every person, rich or poor, powerful or invisible, with the same fundamental respect. That gift is rare. The world needs it. Nia needs to see it in action, needs to grow up watching her father be fully himself, not a shadow worn down by circumstance. I do not know what challenges you will face after I am gone. I do not know what doors will close or what opportunities will appear, but I know this. Whatever happens, do not let losing me become the reason you lose yourself. Find your way back to who you are. Not for me, though I will love you from whatever comes after this life. Find your way back for Nia, and find your way back for yourself. You deserve to be happy, Damon. You deserve to use your gifts. You deserve to stand tall and speak truth and refuse to let anyone diminish you. Teach Nia French, like we planned. Teach her Spanish, too. Teach her that her dignity does not depend on money or what mean people think. Teach her that she is loved bigger than the sky, and remember that you are loved that way, too. By me. Always. Yours forever. Camille P.S. When you finally open this letter, know that you were not ready before. You are ready now. Go be the man I married. Damon sat at the table for a long time after finishing, tears streaming down his face, the letter pressed against his chest. 3 years of grief and struggle and small daily surrenders, and through it all, Camille had known exactly what he needed to hear, had written words that would find him at precisely the right moment. He was ready now. He had found his way back, and tomorrow he would fight for the scholarship fund that would give other children the chances that circumstances had tried to deny them. The board meeting convened at 9 o'clock the following morning in the same conference room where Thornton had been exposed. 11 directors sat around the mahogany table, their expressions ranging from supportive to skeptical to unethically hostile. The empty chair where Thornton had sat served as a reminder of how quickly fortunes could change in this world. Victoria presented the scholarship proposal with characteristic precision, outlining costs, projected impact, and alignment with corporate values. 30 children per year, full educational support, focus on linguistic talent from underprivileged backgrounds. The Dubois Holloway Language Scholarship Foundation. When she finished, the questions began. A director named Patterson, no relation to Mrs. Patterson who watched Nia, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. This is a significant financial commitment with no direct return on investment. How do you justify this to shareholders? Victoria's response was immediate. Our shareholders invest in a company with values, not just profits. Gregory Thornton's betrayal demonstrated what happens when we prioritize financial returns above all else. This foundation represents a commitment to something larger than quarterly earnings. Another director, a woman named Chen, spoke more sympathetically. I support the concept, but the timing concerns me. We have just weathered a major scandal. Perhaps we should wait until the situation stabilizes. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, arguments flowing back and forth across the table. Damon sat in a chair against the wall, officially present as a resource for questions, unofficially there to witness whether Victoria would keep her promise. Finally, the chairman called for a vote. All in favor of establishing the Dubois Holloway Language Scholarship Foundation? 6 hands rose. All opposed? 5 hands rose. The chairman frowned. We have a tie, with 1 abstention. The motion fails to achieve the required majority. Damon felt his stomach drop. After everything, after Thornton's exposure and Victoria's advocacy, the board had still refused. The wealthy protecting their wealth, principles sacrificed on the altar of shareholder returns. Victoria stood, her face carefully controlled. I see. Then I suppose I must make my position clearer. If this board cannot support a scholarship fund to help underprivileged children, then this board will need to find a new CEO. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Victoria Ashford had built this company from nothing. The idea of her walking away was almost inconceivable. Before anyone could respond, the conference room door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, perhaps 70 years old, with silver hair and kind eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. She moved with the careful dignity of someone who had lived long enough to stop caring about the opinions of people who did not matter. I apologize for the interruption. Her accent was French, softened by years but unmistakable. My name is Margaret Dubois. Henri Dubois was my husband. Victoria's composure cracked for just a moment, emotion flickering across her face before she controlled it. Madame Dubois, I did not know you were coming. I was not planning to, but I received word of this meeting and the scholarship that would bear my husband's name. I felt I should be here. Margaret walked to the front of the room, her presence commanding attention despite her modest stature. Henri spoke of you often, Victoria. He was so proud of what you built, and so sad that your success seemed to have changed you. When he died, he asked me to watch over his legacy. I believe this scholarship is part of that legacy. She turned to address the board directly. My husband built his first company with nothing but determination and a belief that success meant nothing if it was not shared. He gave Victoria her first chance because he saw something in her that others missed. He would want that gift extended to children who face the same barriers she once faced. The Dubois Foundation will contribute 50% of the scholarship's operating costs. All I ask is that this company match our commitment. The room fell silent. The chairman looked around the table, reading faces, calculating political implications. In light of Madame Dubois' generous offer, I call for a new vote. All in favor? 11 hands rose. Unanimous. The Dubois Holloway Language Scholarship Foundation was approved. 18 months later, the ballroom of the Grand Hyatt sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the excited chatter of 300 guests. The occasion was the first annual scholarship ceremony, and the room held business executives, educators, journalists, and most importantly, 30 children whose lives were about to change forever. Damon stood near the stage, watching the crowd assemble, his charcoal suit fitting perfectly, his posture straight, his eyes carrying a peace that had been absent for years. Beside him, holding his hand with the fierce grip of an 8-and-a-half-year-old, determined not to be separated from her father, was Nia. She had grown in 18 months, her purple glasses replaced by a more sophisticated frame, her gap-toothed smile now showing the beginnings of adult teeth. But her eyes were the same, warm brown with flecks of gold, carrying wisdom beyond her years and joy that seemed to illuminate everything around her. "Daddy, there are so many people, so many." Her voice was quiet but not nervous. "Are they all here for the scholarships?" "They are here because of what this scholarship represents, baby girl. A chance for children to become everything they are capable of becoming, like you did, like we both did." Victoria took the stage to thunderous applause, her platinum hair gleaming under the lights, her gray eyes sweeping the room with warmth that would have been unimaginable to anyone who had known her before that night at Lumiere. "Welcome to the first annual ceremony of the Dubois Holloway Language Scholarship Foundation." Her voice carried clearly to every corner of the ballroom. "We are here to celebrate 30 extraordinary young people who represent the best of what our society can produce when we invest in potential rather than privilege." She spoke about Henri Dubois, the man whose faith in a struggling waitress had created a technology empire. She spoke about the importance of language as a bridge between cultures, a tool for understanding, a path to opportunity. And then she spoke about Damon. 18 months ago, I made a mistake that could have destroyed a man's dignity. Instead, it destroyed my own illusions about who I had become. Damon Holloway stood before me and refused to accept disrespect, refused to diminish himself for my comfort, refused to let my cruelty define his worth. She paused, emotion visible in her controlled expression. "This scholarship bears his name because he embodies what it represents, the belief that dignity cannot be bought or sold, that every person deserves the chance to develop their gifts, that truth spoken with courage can change the world." The applause that followed was genuine, sustained, a recognition of something that transcended corporate ceremony. Victoria turned toward the side of the stage, and now I would like to invite a very special speaker to share some words with our scholarship recipients. She is 8 years old. She speaks fluent French and is learning Spanish, and she has taught her father as much as he has taught her. Ladies and gentlemen, Nia Holloway. Damon's heart stopped for a moment as his daughter walked across the stage, small but straight-backed, her purple glasses catching the light. He had not known she was scheduled to speak. This was Victoria's doing, a surprise that left him struggling to breathe. Nia stood before the microphone, looking out at 300 adults who were suddenly invisible to her, her attention focused entirely on the 30 children in the front rows, kids her age and older, kids who reminded her of herself. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. "Bonjour. Je m'appelle Nia Holloway. My name is Nia Holloway. My daddy taught me French when I was little. Every morning before school, we practiced together. He says that learning languages is like building bridges between people who might otherwise never understand each other." She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried the weight of lessons learned through experience. "Some people look at kids like us and see only what we do not have. They see families without much money. They see neighborhoods that are not fancy. They see skin that is different from theirs, and they decide we cannot be anything important. Those people are wrong. Damon felt tears streaming down his face but made no move to wipe them away. My daddy was a waiter when I was little. He worked at night and came home when I was sleeping. Some people thought that meant he was not smart or not important. But my daddy speaks 4 languages. He went to a famous university, and he refused to let anyone make him feel small. He taught me that our dignity does not depend on money. It does not depend on what mean people think. It depends on how we treat ourselves and others. It depends on telling the truth even when it is hard. It depends on standing up even when we are scared. Nia looked directly at the 30 scholarship recipients. You are getting something amazing today. People believe in you. People want you to learn and grow and become everything you can be. But the scholarship is not what makes you valuable. You were already valuable. You were already smart and capable and full of potential. The scholarship just helps the world see what was always there. She smiled, her gap-toothed grin replaced by something more mature but no less radiant. My daddy tells me he loves me bigger than the sky. That is how much the people in this room believe in you. Bigger than the sky. Use that belief. Work hard. Learn everything you can. And someday when you succeed, help other kids the way people are helping you. She turned to look at Damon, finding him in the crowd. I love you, Daddy. Bigger than the sky. Nay. The ballroom rose in standing ovation. 300 people applauding an 8-year-old girl who had articulated something essential about human dignity and the power of belief. Damon moved toward the stage, no longer caring about professional composure, reaching his daughter and pulling her into an embrace that communicated everything words could not. I am so proud of you, baby girl. I learned from you, Daddy. The ceremony continued with the official presentation of scholarships, 30 children receiving certificates that represented futures transformed. Each one crossed the stage to shake hands with Victoria and Damon and Margaret Dubois, who had traveled from Paris for the occasion, her husband's legacy now extending beyond the grave to touch lives he would never know. When the last certificate had been presented and the final photographs taken, Damon found himself standing at the edge of the ballroom, watching guests mingle and children laugh, feeling a peace that had seemed impossible 3 years earlier. Victoria approached, her usual armor softened by the evening's emotions. She was remarkable up there. She has her mother's courage, and her mother's ability to see straight to the heart of things. Victoria nodded, her eyes distant for a moment. Henri would have loved this. All these children, all this potential. It is exactly what he wanted his legacy to be. Thank you. Damon's voice was quiet but sincere. For keeping your promise. For fighting for the fund even when the board resisted. You kept your promise too. You told me the truth even when it was uncomfortable. You reminded me who I was supposed to be. She met his eyes directly. I owe you more than a scholarship fund, Damon. I owe you my redemption. We redeemed each other. They stood in comfortable silence. 2 people who had traveled from opposite ends of the spectrum of power to find common ground in the simple belief that dignity mattered more than money. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the ballroom staff had begun cleaning up, Damon and Nia walked along Riverside Park, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the water. The apartment they had moved into 6 months earlier was just blocks away. 2 bedrooms with a view of the park, enough space for Nia to have friends over and for Damon to have an office where he worked on translations that connected people across continents. The cream-colored envelope was still in his pocket, Camille's letter now worn soft from being read so many times. Her words had become a compass, guiding him back to himself whenever the world tried to push him off course. Daddy? Nia's voice broke through his thoughts. Yes, baby girl. Do you think Mommy saw me tonight, speaking on the stage? Damon knelt on the cold pavement, bringing himself to his daughter's eye level, the same gesture he had made hundreds of times over the years. I think your mommy sees everything you do. I think she is proud of the person you are becoming, and I think she loves you bigger than the sky." Nia smiled, her face luminous in the city light. "That is a lot of love." "It is." Damon pulled her close, holding her against the cold and the past and everything that had tried to break them. "It is enough love to last forever." They walked home through streets that had once seemed hostile but now felt like theirs, past coffee shops where baristas knew their names, past the bodega where the cashier always saved the best bananas for Naya, past all the small kindnesses that made a neighborhood into a community. At the apartment building, Damon paused and looked up at the windows of their home, warm light spilling out into the darkness. 3 years ago, he had been a man with $62, an overdue rent notice, and a job serving people who did not see him as human. He had been drowning in grief and bills and the grinding daily work of survival. Now he was director of international relations at a company that valued his gifts. His daughter was thriving in a school that challenged her. A scholarship fund bearing his name would help 30 children every year for generations to come. But none of those external markers mattered as much as the internal transformation. He had found his way back to himself. He had remembered that his dignity was not for sale, not to anyone, not at any price. He had taught his daughter to believe the same thing, and she had stood before 300 people and spoken that truth with a courage that took his breath away. "Daddy?" Nia tugged at his hand. "What are you thinking about?" Damon looked down at his daughter, this small person who carried her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin and a spirit that would not be diminished by anyone or anything. "I am thinking about how lucky I am, and how much I love you." "How much?" He smiled, the same smile he had given her every day of her life, the smile that communicated everything words could not. "Bigger than the sky, baby girl. Bigger than the sky." They walked inside together, father and daughter, into warmth and light, and a future that stretched before them, like a promise kept. The next morning, Damon woke to November sunshine streaming through his bedroom window, the same pale light that had accompanied so many difficult mornings in the years before. But today, it felt different. Today it felt like possibility. On his nightstand, framed beside a photograph of Camille, was Nia's drawing from that morning 3 years ago. The stick figures beneath the yellow sun had faded slightly, the French words worn but still legible. "Je t'aime, papa." He touched the frame gently, a daily ritual that connected him to where he had been and reminded him of how far he had come. In the kitchen, Nia was already awake, practicing French vocabulary with the dedication she brought to everything. Her purple glasses had been replaced by sophisticated frames, her gap-toothed smile now showing the beginnings of adult teeth, but her enthusiasm for their morning lessons remained unchanged. "Bonjour, papa. Elle est prête pour le petit déjeuner." Damon smiled and began preparing eggs, the same simple breakfast they had shared through poverty and prosperity alike. Outside the window, Manhattan stretched toward a horizon that no longer seemed like a barrier. Somewhere in the city, 30 scholarship recipients were beginning their own journeys toward futures that would once have been impossible. Somewhere, Victoria Ashford was preparing for another day of leading a company transformed by crisis into something better than it had been. Somewhere, Margaret Dubois was continuing her husband's legacy of believing in people who had no one else to believe in them. And here, in an apartment overlooking Riverside Park, a father and daughter sat together, practicing French, sharing breakfast, living proof that dignity preserved through hardship could become the foundation for everything that followed. The story that began with 3 drops of water and words spoken in anger had become something else entirely. It had become a testament to the power of refusing to be diminished. A demonstration that truth spoken with courage could change not just individual lives, but entire institutions. A reminder that the measure of a person was not how much they accumulated, but how much they gave away. Damon Holloway had been a waiter, a widower, a father struggling to survive. Now he was a director, a philanthropist, a man whose name would be spoken by generations of scholarship recipients he would never meet. But the most important thing had not changed. He was still Nia's father. He still loved her bigger than the sky. And he still believed, with every fiber of his being, that dignity was the one thing that could never be bought or sold. That belief had saved him. It had saved Victoria. It was now being passed to 30 children every year, a legacy that would ripple outward through time in ways no one could predict. And it had all started with a simple truth, spoken by a man who had nothing to lose except his self-respect. My dignity is not for sale. Not to you. Not to anyone. Not at any price. Some truths, once spoken, could never be unspoken. Some stands, once taken, could never be reversed. Some moments of courage, however small they seemed, could reshape the entire world. Damon Holloway had discovered this in the private dining room of a restaurant where he was supposed to be invisible. He had proven it in a boardroom where he was supposed to be silent, and he would spend the rest of his life teaching it to anyone willing to learn. Our dignity does not depend on money. It does not depend on what mean people think. It depends on how we treat ourselves and others. Bigger than the sky.